Welcome to Only for Your Ears and today's episode. But before we start, I'd like to say thank you to all the people that have shared, liked, and subscribed. This is very much appreciated. Thank you for the love. And now let's begin with episode 41, The Bishop of Borglum and His Men by Hans Christian Andersen, which I've renamed as Waiting on God's Poetic Justice. Well, the structure will remain the same, starting off with a summary where I'll digress some of the highlighted points. Then we'll continue with my critical review on how this fairy tale plays in parallel to today's society, using some examples from films and from books. Then I'll continue with the trigger points, which hopefully are good trigger points and not negative trigger points. And this is how the story triggered me as opposed to how it may trigger other people. So let's begin with the Bishop of Borglum and his men, or waiting on God's poetic justice. The prologue, The Bishop of Borglum and His Men by Hans Christian Andersen, takes place in Jutland near a wild marsh, where the main setting is Borglum Monastery. The story starts with a shipwreck and the bishop's men killing the survivors to claim the ship's goods for the bishop. I digress. Why am I not surprised at the seemingly more powerful robbery of what's not theirs and then killing people for their treasures, then taking ownership of the land? Will we ever learn? The Bishop of Glob desires to gain more power and land and becomes embroiled in a conflict with a widow whose son is away in a foreign land. So the Bishop of Glob is actually, I think, the Bishop of Borglum, which is the area. I digress again. Now my blood is boiling. This spineless man's abuse of power and his sexism is the only way he can garner ultimate power in this tiny kingdom, which he would like to deem as his. The bishop tries to use the Pope's influence to crush the widow, but she remains strong with her faith in God. I digress. The depth of her faith is spinning the wheels of her poetic justice and is annoying the bishop. I wonder why. Let's continue. Reflection point. Abuse of power. The story highlights the dangers of individuals with unchecked power as seen through the actions of Bishop Glob. The bishop's ruthless actions and attempts to control others demonstrates the negative consequences of power in the hands of those who abuse it. The story highlights the negative effects of unbridled ambition and the desire of power. Bishop Jens and his family become embroiled in a web of deceit and treachery to their eventual downfall. This serves as a cautionary tale, warning readers about the dangers of seeking power for its own sake. The summary. The Bishop of Borglum and His Men by Hans Christian Andersen tells the story of Bishop Glob of Borglum. Yes, a power-hungry and ruthless man living in a medieval Denmark. The story is inspired by historical events and focuses on the themes of power, ambition, and consequences of one's actions. The tale's description of the landscape of Borglum Abbey, where the bishop lives. The narrator introduces the Bishop of Glob, who is described as I just mentioned, ambitious, and hungry for power. One day, the bishop's nephew, the knight Sir Boog, arrives at the abbey with a group of warriors. They plan to rebel against the king, and the bishop decides to support their cause, hoping to increase his power, of course. However, one of the men in the group is a spy who reports the bishop's treachery to the king. I digress. Revenge is a dish best served cold, but it usually reaps unsatisfactory consequences for the person with unforgiveness in their heart. I wish it wasn't so, but before the rebellion can take place, the king's forces arrive and capture the bishop. Sir Boog and his men are killed, and the bishop is imprisoned in a tower for the rest of his life. The bishop, tormented by his ambition and the consequences of his actions, is haunted by the ghost of his deceased nephew and the other warriors. Years later, after the bishop's death, the ghost still haunts the abbey, and the story of the Bishop of Glob becomes a legend in the region. The tale concludes with a reflection on the dangers of ambition and the power of the past actions to haunt them, even in death. This is so typical. The Bishop of Borglum and his men serves as a cautionary tale, reminding readers of the potential consequences of unbridled ambition and the importance of considering the impact of one's actions on others. I digress. Tremendous ambition and power are inextricably linked. In fact, people have gone on to not only betray themselves, but their loved ones, just because of the hunger for power. Overall, the Bishop of Borglum and his men present a complex, layered exploration of human nature, societal dynamics, and the importance of embracing change and the progress for a better future. The tale presents readers with a thought provoking story that explores themes of power, ambition, family, etc., and redemption, all set against this rich historical backdrop. Now, in real life, of course, this area has now turned into a place where all the people that come to the island or the place that they are shipwrecked, they're hungry, they're poor, they're starving, and it's a place where people give them food, give them care, look after them until they're well. You know, they've completely changed this whole idea around the whole theme, and it's now a place where people take care of each other and show love and show faith, real faith, in a different way. So here's my critical review on this particular story. There are so many complex, insightful things about this fairy tale that I enjoyed because of the parallels in them and in today's society that rings so true with our everyday experience. Through the Vatican, politics, and royalty, the idea that the royal family has a neutral stance between state and church is quite ludicrous. It's not so. If this were true, then why does the elected Prime Minister of the UK, for example, have to have an audience with the monarch before taking office and uh, forming a government? The idea in the fairy tale and in real life is this trinity of power, and that it doesn't loom large over society. It most definitely does, and it has a very, very tight grip. All it is doing is trying to set up a fake sense of freedom which doesn't exist. The Bishop of Borglum and his men starts out with the group of Borglum's men capturing this shipwreck and killing the remainder of the crew whilst taking their treasure. The sense of insecurity is present in the bishop, so much that he sets out to literally bully a widowed woman off the island, or, or off the land, by taking her land. But her truth faith denies him of this. You also see, you also see the only use as an institution is the power of the men in robes. He's completely befuddled by this woman and her power because she has real faith. And the only power that he has, and a lot of these men dressed in robes in the church have, is the money and is the authority that they have been given to manage over the spiritual realms in a form of an institution. But they're not even really doing that because they have most of these people, or I shouldn't say most, some of these people really actually do not have real faith. So the church basically it's run like a business. The monastery is run like a business. Very few of the clergy have faith, as I just mentioned. In fact, there are Christians working in the church and don't have faith either. This is so true even in today's society. That's why when certain people who have had a struggle with developing faith but are sincere start witnessing the light as Christians, and the non-believers start to get jealous, a bit like in Cain and Abel. Well, Abel's sincere sacrifice speared hatred and jealousy in Cain's heart. That's why he killed him. Where God favors Abel because his sacrifice is sincere. The widow and her deep faith show her true sincerity. This fairy tale, in this fairy tale, there's a lot more too, but let's now take a look at some examples through films and books. The Thornbirds, I'd like to start off with. Ralph de Bricassart, Maggie Cleary, and Margaret Carson are what I would call the Trinity. I'd like to start off with a digress to go into this story. I digress again. Now my blood is boiling. This spineless man's abuse of power and his sexism is the only way he can garner ultimate power in his tiny kingdom, which he would like to deem as his. The bishop tries to use the Pope's influence to crush the widow, but she remains strong with her faith in God. Oh, the Thornbirds for me was an absolutely ravishing, delicious book. It really just exposed so much of what is in this fairy tale. First, you have Ralph de Bricassart, this handsome, this shockingly handsome priest. Then you have Mary Carson, who owns this ranch in Drogheda. She's like a self-made powerhouse woman. Not bad looking, but incredibly intelligent. Much older than the priest by at least 20 or 25 years. And he comes to New South Wales in Australia at this place called Drogheda because he's like the local priest around that area. She sets eyes on him and thinks, she falls in love with him almost immediately. But what's interesting about her She's so sharp and so shrewd. She sees straight through him. And she says to him, why are you here in Drogheda? Is it really the people and the church that you're interested in? Or are you just interested in getting in that red robe and going to the Vatican? And he goes, Mary, you have such an imagination. But it's true. It's true. She called a spade a spade. And then what is even more interesting is that she invites her distant family that are in poverty. She's a self-made millionaire back in that day. And she invites her family that have 5 sons and her husband and the husband and her relative and the daughter to come and live on the ranch and manage it, and so they can make a stable living. And what happens? Ralph meets them and he sees the little girl Maggie, and he is infatuated with her. I mean, he can't keep his eyes off of her. I think she really tugs at his heart, and Mary Carson notices it. And for about on and off 20, almost 20 years that she's alive extra, she she's always trying to tease the priest because she knows that the priest really is all he's interested in is power and money, and her money as well, because really rich. And he loves he's beginning to fall in love with Maggie. As she gets older, he tries to hide his feelings behind being a priest, but he can't do it. And Mary Carson knows it. So on her birthday, she orders a dress, the most beautiful dress for Maggie to wear. Maggie's about 19 years old, and she she arrives at her party. It's a birthday party, and the priest is so bewitched. He he just can't stop staring at her. And then the party breaks out and everybody starts moving around. And Maggie is just absolutely in love with the priest. I mean, it's very obvious from her side, whereas the priest has to keep himself, you know, protected. Well, Mary sees his love for her, and they get alone. They get alone. Mary gets alone with him, and she sort of says, "You're not a man. You're not even a priest. You're nothing. You can't even admit your feelings and admit them to yourself. All you want is power." And then she closes the door because she tells him she loves him. Closes the door, and then she basically dies. She leaves the money of Drogheda, all that fantastic amount of money, and she doesn't she promised that she will get Ralph back, and she does. She leaves the money to Ralph to be the executive over the ranch and the Cleary family. So he and the church, he's in control of everything, and he uses some of that money to get into the Vatican, and he becomes like an assistant to the Vatican. And of course, the mother, Maggie's mother, is very astute. She goes, you're used to getting what you want. She knows exactly what he's done, and she knows that he's power hungry and that he's in denial of his feelings for her own daughter. Anyway, what happens is that finally he expresses he's forced to express his love for Maggie, because the cardinal that he's assistant to says, I think you need to go to the Rose. So you need to deal with your feelings. So he does. And he impregnates her. He didn't. I don't think he wanted to impregnate her, but he impregnates her, and has Maggie has a second child. She has a child with her first husband that she's divorced, and now she has a child with Ralph. Ralph comes back to the Vatican, and he says, I've never felt so much love in all my life. She really, really loves. And he says, yes, she has faith. She's sincere. Whatever her feelings are, they're real. And he can read him like a book. Well, she has the baby, she has Dane, and 20 years later, he meets his son, but he doesn't know that it's his son. Anyway, the son wants to become a priest, just like Ralph, and the mother is just horribly upset. And then the Ralph talks about his feelings about how his mother didn't want him to be a priest, and he did it in spite of her. So, anyway, what happens is that Dane dies in a swimming accident, and in the end, you he confesses that he realizes that Meggie was always the one that had faith, and that he did not have faith. He was really about power. And he said that you've always been so sincere. And I can't tell you how the Thornbirds for me really struck a point when it came to this Bishop of Borglum. The next is Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel. And the my digress is tremendous ambition and power are inextricably linked. In fact, people have gone on to not only betray themselves, but their loved ones. Oh, Cain and Abel by Jeffrey Archer is a perfect example. You have William Lowell Cain, or William Cain, who is born into a family, born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He's born into a family where he has money. His father dies, unfortunately, in the Titanic, so he's left fatherless, but he has his mother. His mother gets married to this man called somebody like Marcus Orson, and he turns out to be a ladies' man. He's off with lots of women, and William notices this and he's very angry. Well, he turns out to be not very good at managing his father's bank. So William is the one that takes over. He's very smart, he's very shrewd, he's very methodical, and the father, the stepfather, uh, disappears from the scene because the mother does an investigation on him and finds out that he's Italian and that he isn't who he really uh, claimed he was. Then you have Abel Robsnowski, yes, Abel Robsnowski, who was born in a forest, and as he was born, his mother died, and he's looked after by like a trapper family, they call them. And one day he he's he's by this very wealthy baron's home, and the baron notices that he's very, very bright, he's very intelligent, and he invites him to play with his son, and also raises him somewhat to help him. Well, he goes to war, and he's Polish. He goes to war, and I guess he meets William, but he doesn't. They don't know each other, and he ends up rescuing William. Many years later, when he's in his early 20s, he decides to go to the United States as an immigrant, and he starts working in a restaurant. And while he's working in the restaurant, people notice that he's excellent on his feet, and he can be like a manager. He can actually own this hotel because he's so great. It's a restaurant inside a hotel, and they can see his potential. So what happens is that the general manager of the hotel applies to William's bank to get money to support the hotel because it's going through difficult times. And William flatly refuses. So the general manager comes back and he tells Abel Rosnowski that this man, William, of this particular bank, has declined giving this hotel money. And so he doesn't know what to do. So this man, unfortunately, commits suicide, and Rosnowski, Abel, blames William for his death, and he's left with all this debt to deal with. So, but unbeknownst to him, he applies again, and on the board, William decides to be the only person that says, you know something, I'm going to back this Rognoski fella man, and I'm going to put money in his hotel and invest, and that's what he does. Anyway, these two men are back and forward at each other. They're very similar. They're born on the same day. They have the same drive. You know, they're both very angry at each other in one way or another. Rovnos Abel is angry at him and vice versa. And there's this rivalry, and there's this really a kind of a confusion because they don't realize that um they don't realize that they actually are so much alike. They rescued each other. They don't realize it. And what happens is that his children, Robnowski's son, ends up marrying William's daughter. And something happens with the bank, and the hotel decides that he wants to buy shares in William's bank and basically cripple the bank. So what happens is that the bank is saved, and afterwards William dies, and Robnowski or Abel, he goes and goes to the funeral. When he comes back, his good friend says to him, I have something for you, please read it. And he opens the letter and he finds out the only person that invested in him was William. And at the bottom, he says, I invested in Abel Robnowski and the Baron Hotel because I thought he was a good investment. And it just completely destroys him. He goes, all this time, this was the man that saved and rescued me. And well, he dies feeling horribly guilty. And at the end, the son and the daughter open up a fantastic hotel in Poland, and they call it Cain and Abel, and that's the end of it. It's really great. It's a wonderful book, and it shows that such hunger for power, unbelievable hunger for power. It takes away the human side. It's like with William that showed that human side at the very end, the human touch, which is amazing. And then we're going to move on to, let's see, Let Go and Let God. Now, this is an amazing film. Let Go and Let God. And it's about a couple of people actually, but the two main characters is a black man and a white woman. This white woman has adopted a black boy who runs off and goes missing, but he's not that far away from the house. He's really like only a mile away in a field, but she can't find him, and she turns to people in her church and the church community. But first, let me start off with the black man. He's the head of a ministry at the Baptist church. You would think that he would have faith, but he doesn't. He's extremely sad. And there's a young woman there, and she says to him, look, there's a wonderful service on Friday. Why don't you come? And he says, no, I can't come. I won't come. But you can leave the invitation just in case I might change my mind. Who knows? So she asks him a question. She goes, when did you know that you were a Christian? When did you know that you had faith? He goes, I don't have faith. I don't have faith. And then he asked her the same question. When did you know that you were a Christian? And it really shocked me. I said, here's this man boldly working in a church, going to church, praying, and doing all these things, and he has no faith at all. And she says, well, in Peter, in the Bible, it says, they will develop faith when they see miracles. So she says, I had a miracle in my life. My mother had cancer. And I was praying for her every day, and she was getting worse and worse and worse. It must have been disheartening. So she says, I didn't know what to do. And I turned to this woman at this church, and she came and she got down on her knees and she prayed and prayed. She goes, she prayed in a way that I've never seen anybody pray. And then she said, a miracle happened, because a couple of days later, not only did my mother get much better, the doctors could not find a trace of cancer in her body. That was the miracle that turned me from just being somebody that kind of believed in God, but into a person that had real faith, just like the widow in Borglum, in the Bishop of Borglum and his men. She had that kind of incredible faith. So he said, well, that's good, and she tells him that this little boy is missing, and they can't find him, and we have to do something. We have to pray for him. And so the story continues, and she says, why don't you have faith? He says, I was an alcoholic and my daughter died. And she says, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. He says, you don't understand. I was driving the car that hit my daughter when she died. So no, I don't have any faith. So he's really angry. And then you switch to the wife, who's desperate up to find her son, because that's the only remainder of her marriage with her husband. Now she's angry at her husband. The son really loved the father. The son gave him a pair of binoculars to always go up to his room and see him leave for work. The father had an affair with another woman, and she never really got over it. And she always threw it in his face. And you could see in past the flashbacks that he's really, really sorry and he feels humiliated about doing what he did. And she just hammers him about it. I will not forgive you for that. You hurt me. And I understand it. But she showed a lot of pride, the way I showed a lot of pride in my unforgiving ways too, which I'll talk about in the triggers. So one day when the boy goes upstairs to see his father go off to work, they had just had an argument. And he said, I'm just tired of it, I love you, but I'm tired of this. So he gets into his car, drives off a bit too quickly, and crashes his car, and he's killed. So she feels a whole world of guilt. Anyway, the story it just transpires into like a dream, and both of these people are driving behind each other, and she goes to find the boy, and she finds out the boy is in the field, and the boy in the field meets this girl who speaks to him, and he goes, "Who are you? Because I noticed that you've been following me. Who are you?" And she says, "I'm in heaven now, but," and he goes, "Aren't you afraid?" She goes, "No, I'm not afraid." And she says, "I don't have fear in my heart anymore. I used to." And what happens is the father drives up, and he sees the boy speaking to this girl, and it's his daughter. He gets out of the car, and the daughter isn't angry at him at all. She knew that he had a problem with drink, but he isn't angry at her. She isn't angry at him. And she waves to him like, "Dad, Dad, Dad." And you see him crying, resting his head on the top of the car. And you realize at that moment he develops faith. And the woman is standing at her husband's grave. And she says, "I don't know why I'm here speaking to you. I'm really sorry that I never forgave you. But I guess the only thing I can do now is to let go and let God." And it's really amazing. It's God's poetic justice. What we would have done, we probably would have done what happened in the Bishop of Borglum, not waited and taken it into our own hands. But they waited, and they got poetic justice, a complete justice, which is great. Now, let's continue with the trigger points. The first trigger I'd like to talk about is a Black woman. It's a true story. In the time of the Ku Klux Klan, her and her husband and her son, the Ku Klux Klan came to her house, dragged the father out, threw gasoline on him, struck a match, and burnt him to death. And before he they strike the match and burn him, he screams out, he says, "God forgive them, for they know what they do." And he dies, and she watches him die. And then a couple of months later, they do the same thing to her son and kill her son. And he says the same thing. They don't know what they do. Forgive them. And it's pretty amazing. I have another situation that I can share with you. It's so amazing. It's moving. And he goes to trial. They get the Ku Klux Klan leader. He goes to trial. And just when he's about to get his sentence, he's going to get life in prison. But the Black woman stands up. She says, "I'd like to come and speak to this man." So she goes, "Can you help me?" And they bring her to him. And she said, "I'd like to be able to visit this man a couple of times a week because I still have love in my heart. And I've got so much love to give him." to show him that I forgive him. It's really amazing. My experience, I have struggled and struggled with forgiveness. And when I listened to this woman's story and I saw something on TV too, was amazing. Why not I? If she can do it, so can I. And it's been really, really hard for me to really forgive because I carried so much pain in my heart. I wasn't able to heal from the pain that I was feeling from the memory of what they had done or what a particular person had done. But when I realized that forgiveness is more about forgiving ourselves and freeing ourselves of imprisonment and bitterness, it became easier for me to not only forgive myself, but to forgive the other person. And I remember when my mother always used to say, I would never, ever, 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 ever forgive you. When she was dumping blame onto me that had no business being transferred onto me and how I felt. And that also helped me with the forgiveness process. The last one that I'd like to illustrate is that there was a man in the South, it's the oldest Black Baptist church in the South, and it was around, and it's still around when Barack Obama was president. The preacher, the main preacher, and about 10 other people were killed. There was this white guy that came into the church and he said, I'd really like to be part of your Bible study. And so they all said, oh, please, please, please come. We'd love you to come. She goes, we'll enjoy you. We'll enjoy you so much. Please come. So he comes in and he sits down and he's there for the whole Bible study. And he says, thank you very much. She said, oh, please come back next week. We enjoyed you so much. And he picked up a machete and he killed about 9 people, including the preacher. It was devastating. And he left the church, but a white woman saw him driving his car in the wrong direction, and she reported him to the police, and he was arrested soon after. A couple of days later, after loved ones had buried these people, including a woman who buried her mother, she was devastated. They were at the jail cell, and they said, we don't want any harm to happen to him, because they understand about God's poetic justice and not to create more harm. So the judge says, well, go on, tell him that you forgive him. Then go on, tell him you forgive him. And so they go up, each one of them, about 9 of them that lost their loved ones, go up as representatives, and they said, we forgive you. And their tears were rolling down their eyes, but they said, we forgive you. We forgive you for what you did. The boy the eyes are dead like a criminal. He's completely empty. He has no remorse. And he's going to probably spend the rest of his life in prison. But it was amazing. And again, if they could do it, so can I. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you for your love. And we'll close out today's episode with my expression, which is healing is a lifelong lesson. Blessed we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Healing is a lifelong lesson we give ourselves, and blessing and gift, we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Until next week, goodbye.